Good morning. Happy Wednesday. My apologies, I ran out of time in the day yesterday to record. So today I'm going to record 2 videos for you. I'm going to record chapter 2 on this one, and I will record chapter 3 on another video, and you will get comprehension questions in a Google Doc. You're trying the Google Doc sharing. If it does not work for you, please let me know. I will copy it into an email and send it to you. I'm just trying the Google Doc thing to see if it is easier for everybody. If not, please let me know. Do not worry about it. I will send it in an email, send it over a remind, text it, whatever you need. Just let me know. Okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 2 of The Secret Garden. Misselthwaite Manor. It was very dark when Mary woke up. The train had stopped at a station, and Mrs. Medlock was shaking her. "It's time to open your eyes. You've had a long sleep. We're at Thwaite Station, and we've got a long drive ahead of us." They were the only ones who got off the train. A stylish carriage was waiting for them. The footman's long raincoat and hat were dripping with rain. He helped Mary into the carriage. She was curious about the house with locked rooms standing at the edge of a moor. "What is a moor?" she asked Mrs. Medlock. "Look out the window in a few minutes and you'll see," the woman answered. "You won't see much because it's a dark night, but you can see something." Mary looked out the window. They drove through a teeny village. She saw cottages, shops, and a church. They were on a high road. She saw hedges and trees. There was nothing else to see for a long time. At last, the horses began to go more slowly, as if they were climbing uphill. There were no more hedges and no more trees. She could see nothing but darkness. "We're on the moor now," said Mrs. Medlock. Mary saw low bushes in the light from the carriage lamps. The wind made a wild, low, rushing sound. The darkness seemed to stretch out forever. "It's not the sea, is it?" said Mary. "No, it's not," said Mrs. Medlock, "nor is it fields or mountains. It's just miles and miles of wild land. Nothing grows here but heather and gorse. Nothing lives on it but wild ponies and sheep." "It sounds like the sea," said Mary. "It's the wind blowing through the bushes. It's a dreary place, but some people like it, especially when the heather blooms." Here is a picture of the moor. "I don't like it," thought Mary. Finally, Mary saw a light in the distance. The carriage drove for a long time toward the light. At last, they stopped in front of a long, low house. The big front door swung open. They entered a huge hall with rows of pictures on the walls and suits of armor standing here and there. An elderly servant waited for them. He was Mr. Pitcher, the man who took care of Mary's uncle. "Take her to her room," he told Mrs. Medlock. "Mr. Craven doesn't want to see her. He is going to London in the morning." "Very well, Mr. Pitcher," she answered. Mary followed Mrs. Medlock upstairs and down a long hallway. They went up more stairs and through another hall and another. Finally, the housekeeper showed her to her bedroom. "Well, here you are," said Mrs. Medlock. "This room and the sitting room next to it are where you'll live. You must stay here, don't forget." That is how Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor. She had never felt so contrary in her life. When she woke up the next morning, a young maid was lighting a fire in her room. Mary sat up in bed and looked around. Here is what Mary walked into. It was a strange kind of room, gloomy. The walls were covered with a tapestry that showed a forest scene. There was a castle in it, with hunters and horses and ladies. The windows had heavy dark curtains on them. Outside, Mary saw a great stretch of land that looked like an endless purple sea. "What is that?" she asked, pointing out the window. Martha, the young maid said, that's the moor. It looks bare to thee now, but it's lovely when it's in flower, and it smells like honey. Thou will like it. Mary thought that Martha sounded funny. Martha talked like most other people in Yorkshire, but the sound of it was strange to Mary's ears. Are you going to be my servant? Mary asked. Who is going to dress me? Can't thou dress thyself? Martha asked, amazed. No, answered Mary, I never did. My Ayah dressed me, of course. Well, said Martha, then it's time that you learned. It'll do thee good to take care of thyself a bit. Mary thought Martha wasn't a proper servant. She was right. Martha was a simple country girl. Working at the manor for money to help her family. There were 12 children in Martha's family, and they lived in a tiny 4-room cottage. Everyone had to learn how to help out and do things for themselves. Martha didn't know what to do with a helpless girl like Mary, who didn't even know how to put shoes on by herself. As Mary struggled into her clothes, the friendly maid helped, chattering about her family. Thou should see my brothers and sisters, Martha said. The youngest ones tumble about, playing in the moor all day. Mother thinks it makes them healthy. My brother Dixon is 12. He's a kind lad. Animals like him. He made friends with one of the wild moor ponies, and now the pony follows him everywhere. Mary had never had a pet of her own. She thought she might like to have one. This made her think about Dixon, a boy who made friends with wild things. Since Mary had never thought about anyone but herself, this was a good beginning. A large breakfast was waiting for Mary in the sitting room. She drank some tea and ate a little toast. Her appetite was very small. Martha was shocked to see so much food wasted. In her family, there was usually not enough to fill them up. Run out and play now, said Martha. It'll do thee good. Out? Why? Mary asked. Well, if that don't go out, what has that to do? Martha responded. Mary looked around. There were no toys, books, or games. Perhaps she would go see what the gardens were like. Who will go with me? She asked. Martha stared at her. Thou will go by thyself, she answered. Our Dixon goes out and spends all day alone in the moor. He has a grand time, making friends with the animals. That can go to the gardens. Martha paused. One of the gardens is locked up. It was Mrs. Craven's garden, but she died 10 years ago. Mr. Craven locked the door and buried the key. After that, Mary put on her coat and walked out to the main garden. She couldn't help but think about the garden that had been locked up for 10 years. Would everything be dead, or would it still be flowered? She walked along the path looking at the trees and evergreens. A large pool with an old fountain stood in the middle of the main garden. The fountain was not running. At the end of the path was a long wall covered in ivy. A door, in the wall took her to a vegetable garden. The place was bare and ugly. It might be nice in the summer, but there was nothing pretty about it now. An old man with a spade over his shoulder walked toward Mary. He had a grumpy face. What is this place? She asked him. Can I come in here? If thou likes, but there's nothing to see. Mary walked down the path. She looked in other doors and saw more gardens. There were walls around all of them. She followed the longest wall and found herself in an orchard with brown winter grass and bare fruit trees. She could see the tops of more trees above the wall, but there was no door to get into the garden where they were. A bird with a bright red breast suddenly burst into song. His friendly whistle made Mary feel happy, which was quite a new feeling for her. She wondered, does the bird know about the locked-up garden? And why had Mr. Craven buried the key? If he liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? I believe that bird flew into the secret garden, Mary said. There was a wall around it, but no door. She walked back to the first garden. She found an old man and said, "I went into the other gardens and the orchard. There was no dog at the door to bite thee," he answered. "There was no door for the orchard into the other garden," said Mary. "What garden?" he said in a rough voice. "The one on the other side of the wall," answered Mistress Mary. "A bird with a red breast was sitting on one of the trees." The old man smiled and whistled softly. The bird with the red breast flew to him. "Here he is," chuckled the old man. He talked to the bird like it was an old friend. "Where's thou been, little beggar?" The bird looked at him without fear. He hopped about and pecked the earth looking for seeds and insects. It's a little bird. "What kind of bird is he?" asked Mary. "He's a robin redbreast. They're the friendliest birds alive. They hate to be lonely." "I'm lonely," Mary told him, seeing the robin made her think of how much she'd like to have a friend. The old gardener stared at her. "Art thou the little girl from India?" he answered. Mary nodded. "No wonder thou art lonely," he said. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ben Weatherstaff," he answered. "I'm lonely too, except when the robin's here with me. He's the only friend I've got." "I've no friends at all," said Mary. "Thou and me are alike then," he said. "We're neither of us good looking, and we're both sour as we look." This was the first time anyone had spoken to Mary so plainly. She started to wonder why she was so sour. Just then the robin flew away. "He flew over the wall!" cried Mary. "There must be a way to get into that secret garden." "Don't be nosy," the old man muttered. "Go on and play." He walked off without even saying goodbye. Ooh, excuse me. All right, that is the end of chapter 2. I'm going to start another video, and I will send both out today. All right, see you in a sec.